Good morning, my friends. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notifications so I can be with you forever. I'm going to be leaving my email in the description, so if you have anything at all you want to ask me or contact me about, feel free to do so there. Today I'm going to be talking about something that I think is very important in our current society and civilization, especially pertaining to younger men, although this can affect pretty much anyone, but specifically younger men because this is generally a condition that is easily rectifiable, I find, in certain contexts at least. And, it's just something that's not really talked about because it's sort of taboo to discuss, especially when it comes to men's health. I feel like a lot of things that are revolving around the mental well-being of younger men is kind of something that is very ignored, and the many solutions towards these problems are often pointed in directions that are actually contrary to what men actually need. One of these things that people tend to assume, like let's say you have a young male who's suffering from anxiety, insecurity, self-doubt, all these kinds of things, insecurity. I think I already said that. But the thing is that a lot of these issues and problems and conditions of, the mind are in many ways attempted to be rectified through the use of psychotherapy or, sometimes some spiritual practice or meditation or things of that nature. And the problem with that is it's not actually addressing the subconscious issues that are present in a lot of cases. It's different for everyone because everyone has a lot of different conditions that need to be worked on. Some men do actually just have a mental condition that they need to work on. But what I'm specifically talking about is the physical aspect of things that have been mostly ignored. And the reason why this affects men primarily is because men have been incentivized culturally to believe that physical exertion, muscle building, strength training, things like that are, contrary to the development of, evolution and existing as a human being or being civilized, so to speak. It's sort of seen as like, something a jock would do or someone who's an athlete, someone who's separate from who you are. Let's say you're just a guy who's studying engineering or something like that, or, in school somehow, and you think that, your main priority at this moment is focusing on your specific academic, your academic path, I guess you would call it. And, when you ignore the body in that regard, you are ignoring your fundamental nature, your fundamental evolutionary nature that has been built up for thousands and thousands of years. And the thing about men that differs from women is that for men, our inherent value and function historically has always been through strength of some kind. Even the noble spiritual gurus of the past still had to have a level of degree of strength because a lot of them were still having to fight in wars and battles and killing each other basically just to survive, or going out to hunt, for instance, or going out to work in a farm. You needed physical strength regardless of what your stance is on, intellectual capacity versus physical capacity. And a lot of people like to divide these two things, like you're either a physical person or you're an intellectual person, which I think is kind of obtuse in a lot of ways. I think that when you combine these two aspects, you become more holistic as an individual. And I say this for men because these conditions of the mind that are perplexing people a lot nowadays, especially dealing with anxiety and depression and fear, are all a lot of the times based around the lack of physical strength in the body. And when I say that, it's very important to recognize that the lack of physical strength being a precursor to these mental conditions is specifically because evolutionarily, when you are physically weak, you tended not to survive, right? That was just nature. That's just life. If you're not strong, you will not survive. Nature will kill you. It doesn't matter if you're, if you were in some yogi tribe or you were a Buddhist monk somewhere, at a certain point, if you did not cultivate a certain level of strength, you would have been probably robbed and killed, which is why, if you look in, let's say, Chinese history, for example, you see that a lot of these early monks had a lot of these issues, whether they experienced illnesses of some kind or they were constantly getting robbed and abused by other people. And then they realized, okay, we actually have to work out the body. We need to actually utilize the body and be physically healthy. And focusing purely on the spiritual aspect is neglecting the human experience of what life has to offer. And when you do that, you end up dividing yourself in a lot of ways. And this is why a lot of men have insecurity issues, because subconsciously they know that they are physically inferior to other men or just to their natural surroundings, and they would not survive in a dangerous circumstance. And this insecurity and anxiety breeds itself. And it's a very easy fix. Ultimately, you just have to go and work out. I personally don't lift weights. I'm not into that. I mean, I'm a pretty lanky guy. I'm not that muscular, so to speak, but I do a lot of strength training and doing calisthenics and things like that. I have like, an ectomorph body, if you will, but it's kind of irrelevant to this topic because really, ultimately, building the body in a healthy way, in a physical way, leads you to building security and anxiety in yourself. And this is one of the main reasons why I sort of have a lot of doubts towards methods of psychotherapy, because I've known a lot of men who seek that kind of thing out and seek out this softness of themselves in order to pursue a condition of themselves that's physically weak, and they somehow believe that this will make them more enlightened or make them more just above what is physical. But they're still plagued by all this insecurity and anxiety and depression and things like that. And don't get me wrong, I still have these issues, but they're so much more alleviated after I've done just a simple workout or simple strength training. I've seen these conditions naturally fade away, and I become more productive. And I also just think more clearly. I'm not caught up in over here all the time, and that just method of being able to ground yourself physically is much more healthy than just constantly pondering your mind and trying to figure out conditions of the mind, when really all you really need is to build strength, build, physical vitality, so to speak. So if we really look into the history of humans, it was all based around building us up from the ground physically and building a society from that way. And then at some point in the 1800s, we see the Age of Enlightenment sort of come around, and there was this rejection of anything that had to do with the physical body, because we believe that we entered a civilized age where we no longer need our bodies and we can just focus solely on our mind and our intellectual capacities. And there have definitely been some men that have managed to grasp that concept, and they've maintained physical meekness while still having a great mind that's free of anxiety and insecurity and feeling inferior, just feeling chaotic, right? Feeling lost. I feel like this is a huge problem for a lot of young men, is feeling lost in a lot of ways, which physical exercise grounds you back into the physical world, and then you can sort of build yourself back up. It is the foundation towards everything. I mean, how else were we able to cultivate our minds in the first place? It came from having a healthy body that channeled upwards into our minds to create who we are today. And now we've sort of come to a point where we've sort of like squeezed out all the possible vitality from our own bodies to fuel our minds, and now our minds are becoming disjointed, and it's starting to develop a lot of issues that we see in the world today. And unfortunately, there is a a tendency to look upon physical. I've said this already. Physical exercise as being barbaric in a lot of ways, and from what I've noticed, from building up strength, those conditions naturally fade away. So this is just really to open up the conversation towards actually building the mind and soul through a foundational process. And that starts with the physical body. And not just physical exercise, because that's just, the way exercise has been dissected and understood, especially in the Western world, is very disjointed and kind of superficial, I find. They kind of look at, first of all, they don't really know anything about muscle building or strength training scientifically. They kind of don't know shit. They know that like lifting things stimulates the muscles and then they get bigger. And that's pretty much all they really know. They don't really elaborate more in depth to what's actually happening, because we obviously know that there are very strong people out there that aren't that big, you know what I mean? And then there's also really big muscular bodybuilders who are just not that athletic in any capacity. They're not that strong in a real world context. And this comes down to more about knowing your body in a deeper level. And these are only found through exercises like yoga and Tai Chi or any kind of martial art that forces you to become in tune with the physical body and to understand it on a subconscious level. And once you do that, you can strengthen it. Subconsciously, you will find security through that way. And I've noticed this as I've, put on more muscle mass, I became less likely to feel insecure or feel less likely to have anxiety or depression, because it's like, hey, I have muscle. Like, what do I need to worry about? And you can just kind of think about this rationally. Like, if you think about people who tend to be plagued with anxiety, it's usually people who are out of shape. Like, it just tends, like, that's the pattern I tend to see a lot of the times. Not that it doesn't plague people who are physically in shape, but there is definitely a discrepancy here that physical exertion in that way and building strength cultivates a sense of feeling secure in yourself, so you can actually build yourself towards a better version of yourself, so to speak. And this process of trying to eliminate that has been somewhat dangerous, I find, in a mentality that sort of values intellectual capacity versus anything else in the world. Because if we're to take ourselves as a holistic being, right, but we ignore other facets of ourselves, we end up only destroying ourselves in the process. When we fixate on only one aspect, let's say our minds, right, we fixate on our minds and ignore every other aspect, and this includes the soul, not just the body. We find ourselves plagued with a lot of issues and a lot of problems, specifically of the mind, because we're fixated on it and we're ignoring every other facet of our bodies. And so while this can pertain to women, obviously, it specifically affects men, like I said, because evolutionarily we depended upon strength. Women didn't really depend upon physical strength as much. They depended upon other aspects of their conditions for survival, which that's another aspect that they need to tap into to understand fully. But for men specifically, you need to tap into your inherent nature, your biological nature. And I don't care if you're non-binary or trans or whatever, you need to look inside and understand your biological makeup, because that is where you come from, regardless of what you feel spiritually or mentally or sexually or whatever. Understanding the biology of where you come from is very important. And this, extends to ethnicity, extends to religious beliefs, because all these things are intertwined into your genetic makeup. So when we talk about the fuel for the mind, it always starts with the body. So having a healthy body is a healthy mind. That's a pretty commonplace statement I find in a lot of places that's said over and over again. But one of the main things about cultivating a healthy body is also having a healthy intention for your body, because your body is a reflection of who you are. So if you go out and build muscle, let's say, you go to the gym and start lifting weights, which I find is a superficial way to build muscle. I find it's kind of, not that it doesn't work, but I find it's just, it's too focused on isolating specific muscle groups rather than taking the body whole, which is why I do full body exercises. I think that's more integral to developing health and developing real functional strength rather than just getting big muscles, because most people only care about looking good, which is exactly what they get. They only look good, but they have actually no function in any other aspect of their lives. So the intention behind it is very important, because I also found early on when I was like developing exercises, I was getting into martial arts, and I was fueling the exercise with a mentality of, insecurity or an anxiety, right? I was doing it in a place of anger, which is what you kind of want to avoid, because once you start exercising in that mindset, you are building that intention physically into your body, which is why you find also a lot of muscular dudes, they tend to have less so anxiety and depression, but then they start having anger issues, they start having sexual deviancy issues, all kinds of issues, because now their hormones are activated. So this becomes another step of having to deal with the hormonal imbalances and also the mental conditions that come with being physically stronger, I guess. So this is like another level that you need to focus on. And it is a process, just like psychotherapy or whatever the fuck. You need to build things incrementally in order to build yourself. And since, especially in my case, I sort of started getting more into physical activity later in my life, because when I was younger, I tended to grasp onto the notion that physicality was irrelevant to all facets of things. The only thing that was important was my mind and my intellect, and I kind of neglected my body in that regard. And only when I was older, maybe like 16, 17, 18, was when I started to have a change of mind. And only really in my 20s did I start to actually really dedicate myself to physical exercise. And it took, some trial and error in terms of the mentality of it to actually become more healthy mentally, so to speak. And so, so when you cultivate strength in that regard, you are building security in yourself to not rely off of other aspects of things, right? Which is why you find drug addicts and people with anxiety tend to grasp onto external processes, right? So in a lot of cases, that can be sex or sexual deviancy. And then once you focus on exercise, you start to stop caring so much about that, because you don't have this inner need to fuel a sense of security anymore, because the security is already built into you. You are secure physically. You've built yourself a structure in your own house. But then, like I was saying, if you don't have the right intentions, and if you're building this structure through anger, through rage, through, hating your enemies, so to speak, you become more of that condition, and you start making that even bigger. So there's a two-way street to this, of how you sort of handle the physicality of things and making sure that you're doing it from the right intention, because otherwise you could be building yourself a sense of security or a sense of identity or a sense of structure that is built around negative emotions, which is what you want to avoid, obviously. And then I'll talk a little bit about like body fat, for instance, because body fat is villainized to the point of ignorance, I would say, because it tends to be, this is more of a problem for women. I find women who neglect having healthy body fat tend to have a lot of insecurity issues, whether they are have excess body fat or excess. What's the opposite of excess? Not enough body fat. They tend to have those insecurity issues, but I won't really talk about that because I'm obviously not a woman, so I don't want to speak on behalf of other women because I don't fully understand their makeup, their genetic makeup rather. But from what I can perceive of them, they tend to have a lot of insecurity with their body image, either being too skinny or too fat, and they tend to avoid having a healthy middle ground, which I find kind of weird. And personally, I find the most attractive women are just ones who are healthy and have healthy body fat levels. And for men too, men don't need as much body fat to be healthy, but it's a little bit marginal in this case. But I did notice that when I was super shredded, those insecurity issues started popping up again. Even though I had a lot of muscle, I still was like super lean and super skinny and just had like crazy six pack, crazy definition, and like egotistically I thought that this felt really good and I looked good, but it was breeding that insecurity and anxiety once more again. And once you get to that point, you realize, okay, I have to actually build and gain some fat, because obviously having enough fat in terms of the natural world and survival is pretty necessary. So if you're down to your skin and muscle, even though you have a lot of strength, if you're in the actual wild and trying to survive and you don't have any body fat, you're not going to make it. So having a healthy amount of body fat is obviously very important, although I think for most people, they could stand to lose a few pounds. I think like 40% of the United States is obese, not just overweight. We're talking like obese, which is a huge, that's a lot of people, and that's a huge problem. But yeah, evidently, healing the body, or first of all, healing the mind starts with healing the body. If you don't have a healthy body and you're having anxiety issues, the first thing you should start is getting in shape. Because if you're having those anxiety issues, therapy isn't going to help you really that much, because your body is sick and you're not fueling your body in a proper way, in a proper context. And, if you build your body and you have healthy levels and, you're still plagued by these issues, then yeah, okay, go see a therapist, whatever. But those tend to be more of an outlier, I find, especially in my own personal case. I find when I'm physically healthy, my mind is in a better place. And this is irregardless of outside circumstances in my life that might set me off in a negative thought pattern, which, is unavoidable. It's going to happen. But when you have a physical health, you have something to fall back on. You have something to sort of cushion the fall, so to speak, so that when you do have these conditions of the mind, you're not lost and you're not hopeless, so to speak, because at least you have physical strength. As useless as you might think it is in the real world or whatever, having physical strength does give you a sense of security in that regard, because you're no longer attached to this feeling of inferiority or feeling of anxiety. You at least have something that is tangible and real and graspable, and no one can really take it away from you. I mean, someone can come and shoot you down and take off your arm or physical things like that. But realistically, you can kind of go about your life not really expecting that to happen, at least not frequently in your life. Unless you live in a really dangerous part of the world, then, that's a whole other issue. I mean, therapy's not going to fucking help you if you're in a terrible third world country and someone's trying to kill your family. I mean, that's you should probably focus on that issue first before focusing on exercise or therapy or anything like that. Maybe therapy afterwards to deal with the trauma of all that. But either way, when you deal with trauma, right, if you just have a physical vitality and health, trauma won't affect you as much. Even though, yeah, it's still there, but you will have something physical to grasp onto, like I've said. And it just cultivates a stronger mind, a stronger will, and a stronger spirit. And it's important to recognize that and not to ignore the body, because to do that is to neglect who you are as a human being. So I'm going to leave it at that. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications so I can be with you forever. And I will see you next time. Peace.